You're watching France 24. This Wednesday, the European Union unveiling plans for a continent-wide single energy market. The plan to reduce its uneasy reliance on Russian gas and cut a massive annual import bill of some 400 billion euros. Let's cross to Brussels and say hello to Maros Sefcovic, Vice President of the European Commission in charge of Energy Union. Thank you for being with us here on France 24.
Thank you very much for your invitation.
You say today's plan is the most ambitious European energy project since 1951 and the EU's founding project, the Coal and Steel Community. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think that it's really true because until now we've been developing our energy policies really in, I would say, nationwide measures. And it's very clear that if you would like to progress and benefit from the European Union, it's very clear that we should look for the ways how we can use the economies of scale, how we can use this enormous, biggest market in the world, which is the European Union, and really to work on creating much more competition on the energy market, which would eventually drive prices down, which is so much demanded by our citizens, by our consumers, but also by the businesses and the industry. And of course, we've been trying for the first time since the European Union was created to approach the energy policy from such a holistic manner. So we are not treating only the energy security. We are also going to work very much on completion of internal energy market. We are going to make sure that we would respect our decarbonization goals, that we would invest much more in energy efficiency to make, for example, our buildings much more smarter so our citizens can reduce the energy bills, and we want to focus much more our research and innovation into the areas where Europe is strong and could be even stronger, like renewables, like efficiency measures, like storage of electricity, and all these new progressive areas where we clearly need much more from our scientists.
Yes, but some are saying that Europe is doing too much too fast when it comes to renewables, and that it's basically pricing European industry out of the market. There was a big report on that last year.
Yeah, I think that it's we can have, of course, the different views on this, but the fact is that on subsidies as a whole in Europe, we are spending approximately 120 billions of euros a year, and it's not just the subsidies for renewables, because we are subsidizing nuclear power, we are subsidizing fossil fuels, we are subsidizing different kinds of, we are subsidizing coal in many of our countries, and therefore, what I think would be very important to have such a very close scrutiny. What is our price structure in Europe, and what subsidies are really needed, and what subsidies could be phased out? Because the truth is that because of the subsidies, which are very often just put into the energy price for the end consumers, the energy bill for our companies and for our citizens is much higher than the energy bills for American companies or American citizens. And therefore, you hear a lot of complaints, and I think that we need to gradually phase out all these subsidies which are really not necessary, and let the market work and let the competition drive the energy prices down.
But if you phase out those subsidies at this point, with the price of oil being so low, will people still be switching to renewables?
I really think so, because we have now the low oil prices, but at the same time, nobody knows how long this will last. I think that last year, nobody would predict that from over $100 for a barrel, we would be in the range around 50 US. And this just proves that these prices are very volatile. So this time they went down, but God knows what happened next year, because they can easily go very much up. So I think that we should use this period as such a golden opportunity to phase out some of the unnecessary subsidies for the fossil fuels, and to really accelerate that energy transition we need in Europe, and really to go more in the direction of decarbonized economy, because that economy is very much based on indigenous sources which we have in Europe, like sun, like wind, like renewables, and this would make us much less vulnerable than the current situation, because we are the biggest energy importer in the world, paying, as you have said in your introductory remarks, 400 billions of euros a year.
All right. And of course, a lot of that these days, one issue that's particularly hot is natural gas. Now, this Wednesday, Commissioner, the Russian president saying he hopes there'd be no Russian supply cuts. I'm reading what he says here, but he's warning that Europe was dependent on Ukraine's, quote, financial discipline. Do you take that as a threat?
I have to say that this issue is very much on my desk since the last Friday, and I am almost in permanent contact with Russian and Ukrainian energy minister, and I was also in a phone contact with Ukrainian Prime Minister Yatsenyuk on this issue. And then, of course, the controversy concerns the gas supplies to the territories of Donetsk and Lugansk, and also the fact who should pay for this gas, who is really authorized to supply gas to these territories. And unfortunately, I am also a little bit concerned by the rising temperature, I have to say, in between these two countries, also in this particular issue.
But when Vladimir Putin says that Europe is dependent on Ukraine's financial discipline for whether or not they're going to get their gas, is that a threat?
I think what President Putin is saying is that if Ukraine will not prepay the gas for its own consumption, that they will stop supplying Ukraine with the gas. But the fact is that Russia was not supplying Ukraine with the gas almost half of the year, but still the transit to Europe was functioning perfectly well. So I would say that this is, of course, not very fortunate rhetorics from the old side, and therefore I decided to invite Ukrainian and Russian ministers to Brussels. I hope that we will have that meeting very soon, where I hope we can treat so-called winter package. These are the gas supplies from Russia for Ukraine for winter, separately from that controversial issue of gas supplies to the territories of Lugansk and Donetsk.
Vladimir Putin hinting that the cutoff of gas supplies to eastern Ukraine is tantamount to a genocide. Do you agree with him?
I heard from Russian energy minister the claim that Russia feels obliged to supply this territory with gas as a humanitarian gesture, because otherwise the people in this territory would be living in a freezing condition. But at the same time, I also know quite well the details of the contracts, which was signed in Brussels in November last year. And I would much prefer that if such a humanitarian supply is being proposed, that this would be discussed between Russia and Ukraine according to the provisions of that contract.
All right, and as you're saying, Maros Sefcovic, you're busy trying to deal with Russia. How do you feel about Hungary trying to make a side deal, it seems, to get Russian gas?
I think that Hungarian Prime Minister said that for them it's absolutely important to secure another deal. I'm concerned about his statement where he said that he sees the energy union as a threat. I think that most of the member states have clearly a different opinion. I never felt such a political support and such a political momentum behind the energy project of the European Union. And this is exactly for that reason that we want to lower the dependence of Europe on one major supplier, that we want to increase the transparency of long-term contracts, and we want to make sure that if any member state is concluding this intergovernmental agreement with a third party, that the Commission will be part of the negotiating team to make sure that these contracts are in the line with the European law, so we can avoid the mistakes and the problems we had with this in the past.
But do you think that Hungary's leader, Viktor Orban, is undermining your own efforts?
I think that the gestures and a statement made by the Hungarian Prime Minister on this issue be not very warmly welcomed here in the European Commission, but I know that also by many other European partners. But this will not stop the European Commission from acting. We just launched this huge transformation process today. We will make the proposal how to make the inclusion of the Commission into this negotiating team for the intergovernmental agreement mandatory. We will propose how to share the information on the long-term gas contracts among the member states and companies from our member states to make sure that we have more level playing field when our member states and our gas companies are negotiating with the dominant suppliers, because the dominant supplier has all the information how they negotiate with different countries and different companies. But on the European side, until now, we are all trying to treat this issue separately. So we do not share the information, and that puts us in weaker negotiating positions. And this is something what we want to change.
All right, Maros Sefcovic, I want to thank you for joining us. Maros Sefcovic, Vice President of the European Commission in charge of Energy Union, on the day when the EU has unveiled its plans for a continent-wide single energy project.